As we have participants from around the world, I wish you a good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening. My name is Briha Sarathi, and I'm here on behalf of Pariyati as its Executive Director. We're grateful that you've all joined us today, and for those of you who are not already familiar with Pariyati, we are a nonprofit charitable organization based in the USA. Our mission is to enrich the world by disseminating the words of the Buddha, providing sustenance for the seeker's journey, and illuminating the meditator's path. Pariyati imports books from around the world, reprints books, publishes new titles, and converts existing material to digital formats. We protect and provide an enormous catalog of Dhamma resources in many languages and formats that otherwise would not be as easily available. We offer many services such as the Pariyati Learning Center, the Treasures of Pariyati, Dhamma Storytime, and the Daily Words for Inspiration via email, RSS feed, and our mobile app. We offer most audio and video material, as well as many ebooks and audiobooks free of charge, including a large number of resources for students of SN Goenka. We also organize donation-based residential Pali workshops and facilitate pilgrimages for Vipassana meditators. Due to the pandemic, however, these had to be cancelled last year as well as this year. We're hoping to restart these two popular offerings next year. For more information about Pariyati, please do visit our website at pariyatti.org. That is PARIYATTI.org. So today we're joined by Venerable Bhikkhu Anālayo, whose new book we've just published. The title is Deepening Insight, Teachings on Vedanā in the Early Buddhist Discourses. Venerable Bhikkhu Anālayo was ordained in Sri Lanka, where he completed his PhD in Buddhist studies. His thesis was also published as Satipatthana, the Direct Path to Realization. And he has over 400 academic publications and is a leading scholar on early Buddhism with a special interest in the topics of the position of woman in Buddhism and Buddhist meditation. He's been recently retired from his position as a university professor in Germany, so he is now a resident scholar at the Barry Center of Buddhist Studies in Massachusetts, USA, and he spends most of his time in meditation. Today, Venerable Bhikkhu Anālayo will be interviewed by Marta van Patten. Marta is a documentary filmmaker and an assistant teacher of SN Goenka. So without further ado, I give you Venerable Bhikkhu Anālayo and Marta van Patten.
Welcome, Bhante.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
This is such a beautiful book, and it's a deeply inspiring book for a meditator. I was so fascinated to read about how you've researched the Agama, is that the correct pronunciation?
Yeah.
Agama discourses and compared them to the early Pali discourses. To be honest, it was hard for me to come up with questions because oftentimes the next paragraph down would clarify my question. So it's very clear. I wonder, I do have a few things I'd like to ask you about though, but I wonder if you could first just start by telling us a little bit about your writing schedule, like when you're writing, how you focus on writing. I know that I've heard that you don't check the internet at all when you're writing, is that right? Or what your writing schedule is like?
Well, I have from the beginning, when I was still living in Sri Lanka, made a point of having as much time in practice or even more time in practice than I dedicate to other activities. And at first, particularly when I was still doing my PhD research, it seemed like it was conflicting. Like I was back in Sri Lanka, I think I did 3.5 days. I don't remember the exact days now, but I think did. No, wait a moment, I'm getting it now. So the first I did was in the morning, because as a monk, I go begging, I eat my food, I take only one meal. So at that morning time, I would do studies and then go up to my kuti, and the afternoon, evening, be in silence and meditate. But afterwards, I found that was not enough. And so I started to set off part of the week. Started with 3 days, then 4 days, now it's 5 days. So 5 days of the week, I am in silence, don't look at email or anything. And then only 2 days I do my work. And in addition to that, I also spend longer periods in continuous retreat in the year. And the fascinating thing is that the more I do that, the more and the better I produce academically. In fact, I have more publications and also more findings than most of my colleagues. Even though I'm actually spending less time working. And it is not that when I'm meditating, I'm thinking about things. In fact, during my meditation periods, I can do some reading, but I can't do any creative work because that sets the mind off thinking. But somehow, when I come out of the practice, then if I look at something, I get just such a clear idea how to put it together that I just write it down like this. And then I revise it once and I get some feedback, but it's very quick for me to move things through. And this is not really Anālayo special, it's meditation special. It's actually the power of practice, the power of mindfulness, that ability to overlook the situation, see what's relevant, to position things front, back. And then when I do something, I do it also continuously. Then really like stick with it and I don't have this, I don't even know what you call that, when these things pop up on your computer saying you got an email or there's a message, I disable all of these. And so in my working times, particularly the afternoon, like from 1 or 2 o'clock to say 7 or 8 o'clock, I have no disturbance. I'm not meeting anybody, I'm not taking any phone calls, no messages, because I want to have this quiet time for just working continuously. Because you work a little bit and then, there's Marta, there's Brihas, there's so-and-so, and then you come back, the mind is not really in the mood to move through things. So in short, the secret of my many publications is the cushion, the meditation.
How to meditate. Okay. So I wondered if we could start by you reading the introduction to the book, because it gives a nice overview of what it is.
Happy to do that. And the ensuing pages present a selection of passages from the early Buddhist discourses that provide perspectives on the cultivation of liberating insight into Vedanā, sensation, feeling, or feeling tone. For meditators, such passages can be of considerable help as reference point for deepening insight. My presentation is based on textual sources that reflect early Buddhism, which stands for the development of thought and practices during roughly the first 2 centuries in the history of Buddhism, from about the 5th to the 3rd century BCE. These sources are the Pali discourses and their parallels, mostly extant in Chinese translation, which go back to instructions and teachings given orally by the Buddha and his disciples. In those times in India, writing was not employed for such purposes, and for centuries these teachings were transmitted orally. The final results of such oral transmission are available to us nowadays in the form of written text. Due to the vagaries of oral transmission, an appreciation of the early Buddhist perspective on a particular teaching, in the sense of bringing us as close as possible to the time when the Buddha lived, can greatly benefit from taking into account parallel versions of a particular discourse or passage. As such comparison can help detect errors that occurred during transmission. My presentation is meant to provide direct access through the medium of translation to the Chinese Agama parallels to relevant Pali discourses. The extracts translated below come together with a reference to the relevant page in the standard translation of the respective Pali version, so that interested readers can do their own comparison beyond the few points of interest that I have mentioned. In order to facilitate comparison, in my translation I adopt Pali terminology, even though the original use for translation into Chinese was not in Pali. I begin my exploration with passages from the Samyukta Agama, a collection that is particularly rich in material relevant to an understanding of Vedanā, followed by taking up the other three Chinese discourse collections. The texts surveyed in this way, which follow the sequence in which they occur in these collections, throw into relief the remarkable potential of contemplating Vedanā as a powerful avenue for progress to awakening. In commenting on such passages, my chief concern throughout is to bring out practical aspects that are relevant to actual insight meditation. May these little collections serve as a support for those who have sincerely embarked on the path to liberation. So saying this in a little different way, what I was trying to do in this introduction is like two main points. One point, it's really meant for practitioners. At the same time, I have to give some kind of context where I'm coming from to explain this idea of Buddhist Chinese agamas and how does this relate to Pali, because this is very much in the field of the academia. So basically, at the time of the Buddha, as I said in the introduction, everything was oral. And oral transmission has its strength, but also its weaknesses, which means that nowadays it is not possible for us to say with absolute certainty, the Buddha said exactly this. We can only say about 200 years later, people thought that he said this. We cannot arrive at total historical certainty. We can be certain what he did not say, because a lot of later developments that sometimes are being attributed to the Buddha that are definitely not by the historical Buddha. Oral translation from India went in different lineages, and one of these lineages went down to Sri Lanka and is now extant in the Pali language. But there were different groups of monastics orally passing on the text, and other groups, their final results ended up, some of them in Central Asia as fragments. There's a language called Gandhari and some in Buddhist Sanskrit. Some have been translated into Tibetan, very few. And quite a lot has been translated in China because monks going to China to teach Buddhism there, they brought text along, also the early discourses. And so we have, in addition to the four main Pali collections, the long, middle, long, topic-wise and numerical-wise organized collections, the Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, we also have four such collections in Chinese. However, they're not from the same school. The Digha, the long, is from one recited tradition, the middle one is from another. But when we compare this, and sometimes we have one parallel, 2, 3, 4, 5, we can see how they differ and how they're similar. So where they're similar, we can be pretty sure that we are getting closer to the original. We are coming close to this assumed point of saying about 200 years after the Buddha's time, what did people think he taught? Where they differ, then sometimes we just don't know. That says A, that says B, no idea. But sometimes we can see, oh, look, this is probably an error. It happened because this kind of pattern in oral transmission, they accidentally brought this in, they made this mistake. So there's a possibility of like positioning things in a historical perspective. And that historical perspective then also affects the Pali discourses. It means that if something is in a Pali discourse, we cannot really say like, oh, this is absolute issue of the Buddha's word. It's a record of the Buddha's word. It's a record of the Buddha's word as it was believed to have been about 200 years after he lived. And it's a record that because he went through oral transmission, there could be errors. And these parallels can help us to correct some of the errors, or at least broaden our perspective. For myself, that was a major discovery for my own understanding. And this is really what I try to do with all my publications, saying, look, we have actually different lineages. The Pali is a wonderful one. I love Pali, my favorite language. When I recite by myself, it's Pali, of course. But let's see that there are also other transmission lineages. And because most people don't know Chinese, and I am fortunate, I learned a little bit of Chinese, I translate them into English. And then anybody who likes to have that broadening of perspective, they can use my translation and compare with the Pali or with the English translation of the Pali and just see for themselves the similarities, which is actually the most powerful impression, the similarities, the congruence, the agreement on basic points. No fifth noble truth, no question, impermanence, dukkha, not self, all of that, no question about that. But also sometimes see the small differences and just see what makes more sense, how do I position myself. And so it's with this idea of opening this field of fruitful inquiry that really informs much of my writing and also this book.
Thank you. So one of the sentences in the introduction, it says, in order to facilitate comparison in my translation, I adopt Pali terminology, even though the original used for translation into Chinese was not in Pali. Maybe you just explained that, but I still don't quite understand that part.
Well, we don't really know what language the Buddha spoke. It must have been some Prakrit, but it was not Pali. So the historical Buddha did not speak Pali, but a language that is quite similar to Pali. There was quite a range of these different languages, and one umbrella term we use is Prakrit. So the Buddha spoke some Prakrit, and with these Chinese agamas, because the Chinese, they have such a different way of writing. Like if they want to write your name Marta, they don't have M-A-R-T-A, but they would try to, for example, they would use the character for horse, ma, to give the sound ma, and then they would put another kind of thing for erta. They have this way of trying to communicate sound because they don't have letters as we have. And so from the way how the Chinese translate a particular name, we can sometimes reconstruct what language that name was. Whether it was more Prakrit or more Sanskrit or whether it was Gandhari. This is a specialist area, and I'm not particularly good at that. I only sometimes try to look up because this is like very high philology. But we can say, for example, that the collection of topic-wise discourses extant in Chinese was translated from a text that had considerably more Sanskrit elements, whereas the middle-long collection, the Madhyama Agama, was very clearly a Prakrit. So we have these ideas about underlying languages of the Chinese translations. But I'm using Pali because this is the language that my audience is used to. But I have to explain that because otherwise some of my scholar colleagues, they will then start criticizing me. Oh, you're pretending that was all in Pali. What are you doing there? I just have to be clear, like, look, I'm using Pali for purposes of ease of communication, but I'm not pretending, one, that the Buddha spoke Pali, and I'm not pretending, two, that these texts were in Pali and then translated into Chinese, because these two would not be historically sound.
Okay, well, so could you describe a little bit more about how the Chinese Agama discourses came to India from China? I know that's a long story, but just for the listener's sake. Now, was that Xuanzang, or that's a different story?
No, Xuanzang is much later also. Okay. You can imagine that even at the time when the Buddha was alive, there were all these different, like, if he just gave a new discourse, nobody had an iPhone and let everybody, Buddha's just given a discourse, you want to hear? So that discourse would slowly start to percolate. And maybe if you heard the discourse, but I was living in some other part way over India, we might meet only after 6 months. And you say, Bante, I was there, the Buddha said this and this. You want to hear? Let me tell you. So I'm getting it only 6 months later, maybe a year later. There was never like a uniform center of discourse production. It was always like a fluid and fluctuating situation where some people knew a discourse by the Buddha, others did not know it, and then they heard about it. And this situation became stronger and stronger after the Buddha had passed away. And this is how suddenly then gradually we have these different transmission lineages forming. And a key element here is the recitation of the monastic code of rules. Suppose you were also a monk and I'm a monk and we are from different traditions. And by the time of this oral transmission, the code of rule that you know and the one that I know have started to differ. We can no longer perform the Uposatha ceremony together. And so there's a tendency for oral transmissions to crystallize around monastic lineages. And this is why we have like a Theravada transmission in Pali, a Dhammaguptaka, this is another school, this is the monastic school nowadays observed like in China, Korea, Vietnam. We have the Mula Savastivada school, this is the one nowadays observed by the Tibetans. They all have their different lineages. And some of these Indian monks who had memorized maybe one whole collection, they would travel to China to teach. The Madhyama Agama, for example, was actually translated into Chinese by an Indian monk, Gautama Sanghadeva. He went to China, learned Chinese, and then translated from a manuscript. But the Ekotarika Agama, the Anguttara Nikaya counterpart, was a Tokharian monk, and he had just memorized it. And he did not know Chinese. So he went to China, and he was reciting, and then the Chinese were translating into Chinese. There's all different kinds of scenarios, how eventually we came to have these discourse collections in China. And the Chinese, basically, they translated everything. It's just the amount of canonical material there is just vast. Some of the important Mahayana scriptures, they translated 3, 4, 5 times, different versions. They were just willing to do everything just to get this material into Chinese so that the local population could benefit from it. And thanks to this enormous translation effort by the Chinese, we have these 4 Chinese agamas. And they have been passed down in China. They are now in the Chinese canon. And this is what I have it standing down there in my library. And this is what we can now consult to read the parallels.
So on a personal note, what drew you to study and compare the two discourses, Agama and?
Well, the Satipatthana, my whole interest is always starting off from the meditation practice. And so for me, the choice to take the Satipatthana Sutta as my PhD topic. And I was always puzzled by this fact that we have these 4 Satipatthanas, that they don't seem to build together into a single practice. And while I was doing my PhD research, I would read, there are some people some scholars who have already written about the differences between the Chinese and the Pali version. And so in my PhD thesis, I just mentioned that, but that really intrigued me. And so when the PhD was finished and I had an opportunity, then I started to learn Chinese to be able to look at these texts myself.
And in terms of learning Chinese and also I assume Pali, was that a struggle? Did it take a long time or that came naturally, or how did that?
Well, I have my own way of learning languages, which is very much, with all of my language, I just start, and I just keep doing it as a mindfulness practice. Yesterday with my friend Joseph Bolstein, he was asking me how I learned Italian. I was thinking, I just went to Italy. And I just started to talk. And it was all wrong, but I keep talking. And now I can speak Italian. And with Pali, I just kept reading and reciting and only bringing in the grammar much later. And with the Chinese, it was the same. I don't know, I have my own very special way of learning languages, which is very intuitive and based on using meditative qualities.
Okay, great. Okay, so just coming back to this present book, can you just explain a bit what inspired you to write this particular book, comparing Vedanā and the different discourses?
Vedanā is really a key aspect for the cultivation of insight. I mean, it's the junction in dependent arising where craving can arise but doesn't have to arise. And this is just a very powerful opportunity for us to bring the teachings right into the practice, to get a clear understanding of what is Vedanā, what are the problems, and then we have a background against which we can better navigate what's happening in our meditation practice.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you can read this section on water bubbles, page 3.
The early discourses illustrate the nature of Vedanā with a wealth of similes and metaphors. These can be of considerable support to meditation practice, as they can capture deep insight themes in a way that is intuitive and does not require much conceptual input. Several of these similes and metaphors occur in the Samyukta Agama, a collection of shorter discourses assembled topic-wise, actually in Chinese, which has its counterpart in the Pali Samyutta Nikaya. Out of the 4 Chinese Agamas, the Samyukta Agama is the collection that has the majority of textual material relevant to Vedanā. The same holds for its Pali counterpart, the Samyutta Nikaya, which also has considerably more material on Vedanā than the other Pali Nikayas. My survey of relevant material from the Samyukta Agama collection begins with a particularly powerful metaphor to illustrate the nature of Vedanā, bubbles on a water surface during rain. This image occurs in the context of a series of analogies for each of the 5 aggregates. For the second aggregate of Vedanā, the relevant passage in the Samyukta Agama proceeds as follows. Monastics. It is just as when, during a great rain, there are bubbles on the surface of water, rising and ceasing one after another. And the clear-sighted persons carefully examine, attend to, and analyze them. When carefully examining, attending to, and analyzing them, they find that there's nothing in them, nothing stable, nothing substantial. They have no solidity. Why is that? It is because there's nothing solid or substantial in water bubbles. In the same way, monastics carefully examine, attend to, and analyze any Vedanā, past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, sublime or repugnant, far or near. When carefully examining, attending to, and analyzing them, the monastics find that there's nothing in them, nothing stable, nothing substantial. They have no solidity. They are like a disease, like a carbuncle, like a thorn, like a killer. They are impermanent, dukkha, empty and not self. Why is that? It is because there's nothing solid or substantial in Vedanas.
Right. I love this simile so much because it's so easy to relate to. It's so easy to imagine that, and it's such a beautiful analogy to Vedanā.
What does it tell you? What does it tell you?
I mean, it's something that it's just so impermanent. It's so it's so ephemeral. There's nothing to hold on to. It's just gone before you know it. So, and the image, of course, is just also, it's very calming to think about it that way. To be more relaxed about facing the different sensations, whether they're extremely painful or whether they're extremely subtle. That image kind of helps just to keep, remember that the calmness is so important.
Yeah. The bubble looks almost as if it was solid. No, it's so big. It's nothing.
Yeah.
And particularly painful feeling.
Yeah.
They can feel so solid, no?
So solid. Yes.
Overwhelming. And then I am the pain.
Yeah.
I become the pain. And it's so bad and we'll never get, I can't handle it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's speaking of pain, the next section I'm hoping you can read for us is from the chapter called The Abyss of Pain.
If we finish with the water bubble,
Well, do you have more to say about it?
I was just wondering if you have some more associations with it.
I mean, for me, I worked for a long time in a very strong way. I pushed really hard and I sat for very long hours, and I didn't understand that it's really important to take breaks and to know when the mind needs a break, to discern that. And so that's why I was very interested in that chapter, and then also this when you talk more about pain and learning to work with that. It's very subtle, it's a very subtle thing to know when is it time to stop.
Yeah. And that has really to do with somehow taking almost our identity as a meditator too serious, and then we start to really push.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can burst that bubble,
yeah,
but still have that wholehearted dedication.
Mm-hmm.
The life is for the practice, of course, but the pushy part, that's actually not the way forward. Yeah, if we can burst that bubble.
Exactly. Yeah, because the mind will start to attack itself also. Like if you take break, oh, you're lazy and all this kind of thing, which is of course Mara, but still it's very convincing, early on it's like, oh, I'm not working hard enough and all this. And you slowly have to realize, oh, this is all part of the game,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, when I was just ordained in my early years in Thailand, I was also very extreme, and I was just trying to be the hardest of the tough ones, and just living in a cave, sleeping on the bare stone floor, and doing all this kind of things, and thinking like I'm really doing it. My practice, Marta, zero. Zero, seriously. I was sitting, but nothing happening.
Yeah.
Because the mind was so stiff with this identity of the fighter.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I am a special meditator. This I can sit for long hours. That's how it was for me. So.
I push through the pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not at all to say that now we take a relaxed time and not practice anything. I mean, but the energy, the middle path, not going too far, not lagging behind. Beginning of Samyutta Nikaya is so beautiful, or the simile of the lute. The strings are too tight.
Yeah.
You can't play music. The strings are too loose. You can't play music too sona. Because he was just like the two of us. He was just pushing. He was doing so much walking meditation that his feet were bleeding. I mean, what a thing to do. No, there's this wholehearted dedication, but with a smile and relaxation. And bursting all those bubbles of the meditator's identity.
Yeah. Okay, so.
Go for the next.
Okay, so the next one is this chapter, The Abyss of Pain.
Experience of pain can at times be overwhelming, comparable to an abyss. Yet with meditative training, it becomes possible to avoid falling into this abyss. The two basic responses when facing this abyss of pain find expression in the following way. The abysmal great ocean is what foolish people in the world call an abyss, which is not what is called an abyss in the noble teaching and discipline. What is called such in the world is just a great accumulation of water. If one is oppressed by Vedanas, of manifold pains that arise from the body, which torment or kill, this is called being in the place of an extreme abyss. Being oppressed by painful Vedanas risen in this body, which torment or kill, foolish, unlearned worldling, sorrow, lament, cry and wail. Their minds give rise to confusion and derangement. They sink for a long time without a place of rest. being oppressed by painful Vedanas risen in this body, which torment or kill, learned noble disciples do not give rise to sorrow, lamentation, crying, and wailing. Their minds do not give rise to confusion and derangement. They do not sink in birth and death, having gained the place of rest. The Pali version makes the same basic contrast in terms of either not rising up from the abyss or rising up from it having gained a foothold. The two parallels repeat the basic message in verse, which highlights the need to endure pain with patience. Patient endurance would indeed offer a place of rest or foothold that helps to avoid sinking in the abyss of pain. This can be related to the implication of the image discussed above, which recommended the perception of pain as the tip of a sword or a dart. The recommendation is to find a place of rest or foothold by developing the appropriate mental response to bodily pain, so that the underlying tendency to aversion does not get triggered. Such would indeed be possible through cultivating patient endurance. How to go about this receives further elaboration with the image of a dart in the next discourse.
Yeah, this image of a foothold or a place of rest is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Of just not, learning to not react to it, and learning to see that it's also just this oscillating, changing, vibrating phenomenon. Could you talk more about this foothold or place of rest?
Well, I particularly relate to this abyss, or this being torn down when, particularly with painful feeling, then there comes the mental agitation that makes it much worse. And this is something that is very, very vivid right now with the COVID situation. How meditators react to COVID and how people who have no mental training are completely sinking in the abyss of loneliness, fear, afraid of dying, caused by COVID. This is such a major difference. And the point is really that one has this broader perspective, and also this understanding that it's all about the mental attitude towards things. There's this beautiful passage. This Nakula Pita is very old, and he comes to see the Buddha, and he says, I would have liked to come more often, but I'm very old and sick, and I can't really come. And the Buddha just turns to him and says, you should train like this. Aturakayo chittangana turang bhavisati. Body being sick, mind will not be sick. Such a beautiful instruction. Aturakayo chittangana turang bhavisati. That is my mantra, is the wrong word, but I'm using it in a similar way. This is the thing that I use. I have a chronic pain problem situation, so I get the opportunity to work with pain. And this is so simple and clear. I look after the body to the extent to which this is possible, but hey, there's things that I can't change. Body decides to be sick, okay. Hey, my mind, no, I'm not going to get sick mind. I'm going to watch that. And with that mindfulness, particularly mindfulness at the level of Vedanā, of the impermanence of Vedanā, I have that foothold. I have that strong place from which I'm not getting swept over by the storm of bodily pains or sink in the abyss of the bottomless ocean. And this is such a simple practice, if we talk about it. More difficult when we want to put it into practice, but it really pays off, It really pays off.
Yeah, and it's one thing to learn to be equanimous to pain when you're sitting on the cushion, and then to apply it, when you get some disease or fever or body ache, whole body, and to remember, okay, this is the time to put this, this faculty that I've developed into practice, sometimes we forget. So,
Marta, we all forget. We are not perfect, but we
Yeah.
have the tool, and
Yeah.
sometimes we remember.
Yeah,
Isn't it? Yeah.
that's true.
Let's
Yeah.
look at the positive part. Sometimes we remember.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted, COVID's so horrible. We go like, horrible, yes, but there's a way of not getting caught in that. Shh.
Yeah. Let's go to this let's go to this since we're already talking about it, the next part, which is about the dart. I really like this. I was trying to understand this more clearly. So it's on page 20.
To learned noble disciples, through bodily contact, painful Vedanā arises. That is greatly painful and oppressive, even leading to the ending of life. They do not give rise to worry or complain by crying and wailing. And their mind does not give rise to confusion or derangement. At that time, only one Vedanā arises, namely bodily Vedanā. Mental Vedanā does not arise. It is just like a person who is afflicted by one poisonous arrow and not afflicted by a second poisonous arrow. For learned noble disciples, at that time only one Vedanā arises, namely bodily Vedanā. Mental Vedanā does not arise. Being confronted by pain, the response of the untrained mind is to want to get away from it as soon as possible. Sensual indulgence offers the vain promise of providing an escape from the pain. Hence, the untrained mind reacts to pain by chasing after sensual pleasure, perhaps even more than any way done ordinarily. As the discourse clarifies, the net result is to increase the bondage to Vedanā evermore. The situation differs substantially when the mind has been trained. The crucial difference is that the arrow of physical pain need not lead on to the additional arrow of mental sorrow. One's mental training makes it possible to experience only the bodily Vedanā of pain, but not the mental one. Aversion no longer manifests, and the automatic response of searching for sensual indulgence also does not get triggered. The reason is the clear understanding that there is an alternative to handling painful Vedanā other than sensual indulgence. This alternative is to face the challenge of pain with a balanced mind, rather than react to it with an unbalanced mind. This, then, is the implication of seeing unpleasant Vedanā as the tip of a sword or a dart. The task is to avoid increasing the pain that is already there from being struck by the tip of a sword or hit by a dart. Such avoidance requires training oneself in the right mental attitude, inculcating the type of inner balance that is able to react to the impact of pain with mindfulness and patience.
Why do you think that the simile is the tip of the sword rather than the whole sword? Is it that the tip is there and you have this chance to not react to it before you get impaled by the whole sword? Or
I have not really researched ancient Indian weaponry, but I was just imagining that they have, there's different type of swords. There's the round one, the saber, which more kind of like cuts, but there's another one which they use in the Middle Ages where it's really the tip that hurts you, where it's not so much the cutting edge, but the tip of the sword. And I've just been taking it in that sense. But in order to give a really informed answer to that, I would have to do that research. And I had that on my mind at one point, but then the problem was that I realized how much effort humanity has spent in developing things to hurt other human beings. And then I was no longer in the mood to look at weapons.
Yeah.
So
It's true.
and in the Chinese, there's an arrow. It speaks of poisoned arrow or poisoned dart, and this is obviously an arrow. The Pali doesn't have the qualification poison, and the whole simile only makes sense if it's just a normal arrow or dart. Then the second one makes a big difference. But if it's poisoned, the first one is already enough. I will already die of that.
Right.
So this is a very clear case where somebody in oral transmission has been like trying to give a very nice Dharma talk maybe, and then just put this poison in as a kind of making the image stronger without realizing that it's actually counterproductive. It's a typical instance of these type of errors that we get. And then when we only have, if that had been the Pali version, we would only have the poison arrow, and then we would all think like, what's the point? We don't really get the simile. And then, oh, you have the parallel, take the poison out. Oh, now it makes sense.
Right.
Now I get this whole image like, and the ancient Indians were very good archers. In fact, the army by Xerxes that in 500 before Christ invaded Greece had Indian archers. They were clad in, they had bamboo arrows. And so in the war situation, you can really imagine like somebody is shooting, and if I get hit by, say, maybe I get hit here, and then I stand up and, oh, it's so painful. What are the others going to do? Shoot again, shoot again, shoot again. But if I just duck down and keep quiet, I won't get shot at by the second arrow. So it's a very, very vivid image how by foolish behavior I make the situation much worse. And that's the same with pain. The pain is there and we can deal with it wisely, or we can deal with it foolishly. And foolishly, oh, it's so bad, oh, it's so horrible, it's so painful. Can I get some central destruction somewhere? Pain, please. You talk to any nurse in hospital, they will tell you that's exactly what happens. Patients in pain and they crave for food and sex and all these kind of things to get something positive, not understanding that every time I indulge in sensuality, I am more strongly identifying with Vedanā. The more strongly I base my sense of identity of Vedanā, the more strongly I'm going to get hit when it changes to pain. The only solution is to have a distance between the pain and myself, not to identify with Vedanā, to experience Vedanā with equanimity. Bubbles, pop, pop, changing.
Right. So on this note, and just further to the conversation we were having before about going a little bit in the other direction of going to the extreme, almost like in some of it you mentioned that sometimes people almost think of it as the meditating in order to atone for their mistakes or something. So they almost make it harder or more painful. They force the body into more painful positions in order with some concept like that. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to this about going to extremes in meditation in terms of tolerating pain and learning to work in a more balanced way.
I mean, this is what the Buddha reportedly did before his own awakening. Right. And the first teaching he gave, according to tradition, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, is precisely about the middle path. And so he really tried this forceful approach and this giving oneself a hard time, but that is not balanced, and it doesn't lead to that inner maturity and to the letting go that we really need. Because the whole path is about letting go of what is unwholesome, and eventually letting go of all that is conditioned for the breakthrough to Nibbana to happen. But if I'm all uptight and hard on myself, I can't let go. And I'm creating a sense of ego that, even though it has a positive motivation, the motivation of progress on the path, it's very tight and painful. And so there's the need, of course, to be willing to bear up with even small little discomforts that happen in the practice in daily life. But we certainly should not augment them or on purpose impose them on ourselves. It's just not a very skillful way of going about the practice. And the deep insights, they happen in a mind that is relaxed, and in a mind that also has at least a little bit of joy.
Yeah.
Joy is one of the awakening factors. And a mind that is hard on myself and really pushing hard will find it very difficult to generate that joy. It doesn't have to be the jhana, wow, bliss, but it has to be that subtle, little bit of a smile, that joyful moving along with the teachings, joyfully deepening the practice. It's a very important factor. And another thing is, boil down the whole of the teachings. What is it? Not self, no. Other side of the coin of not self is dependent rising, not self. So what is not self telling us? I mean, you and I, we are not talking about having some belief in some eternal soul, but you and I still have work to do on not self, no? And that's about our ego. Very nice way of working with the ego for me is to have a little bit of humor at myself, you know? Like, oh, Anālayo, here you go again, eh? Meditate, eh? Seen you, eh? When I do my continuous retreats, probably almost every day, I try to find occasion to crack a joke at myself, at least one time a day, just to make sure that, because I'm meditating quite a lot and I'm not doing anything else, that I don't get too much into this identity of the meditator and what a great meditator I am, what a great thing I'm doing. And it is this touch of humor, which is not like loud, laughing, stupid jokes, but just this slight, like little bit of a smile that comes along, which makes a world of difference. It makes a world of difference. And when we have that attitude, this being too hard on ourselves will naturally not happen.
Yeah, I clearly remember after working in a more kind of a tough way on myself for a long time, of when I relaxed and learned how to take breaks, and and then having this subtle smile just come on the face while meditating, and just thinking, oh, this is really different. This is a really different way of working. And in speaking of that, it's actually the other section. I think this is the last section. Oh, well, there's two more sections I'm hoping you can read, but the next one is actually the chapter called Commendable Joy.
We're running a little short of time for two readings, so you decide for one of them.
That's true. Maybe we decide for one. Let's go with Commendable Joy because it wraps up our conversation so nicely.
The indication that some types of joy are commendable, already evident in the passage taken up above, can be explored further with the help of the Gita Giri Sutta and its Madhyama Agama parallel. The narrative setting of the discourse shows a group of monastics unwilling to follow the Buddha's injunction to restrain their food intake by not eating at night. After rebuking them for their obstinate behavior, the Buddha explained that his instructions were based on his own knowledge and insight into the potential repercussions of pleasant Vedanas. The relevant part in the Madhyamagama discourse proceeds as follows. If I had not known as it really is, had not seen, had not understood, had not grasped, had not rightly and completely realized that there can be pleasant Vedanas that increase bad and unwholesome states and decrease wholesome states, it would not be proper for me to teach the abandoning of such pleasant Vedanas. If I had not known as it really is, had not seen, had not understood, had not grasped, had not rightly and completely realized that there can be pleasant Vedanas that decrease bad and unwholesome states and increase wholesome states, it would not be proper for me to teach the cultivation of such pleasant Vedanas. Both versions apply the same explanation to unpleasant and neutral Vedanas. This passage confirms the conclusion drawn above, in that progress of insight is not just about avoiding all that is pleasant and giving oneself as hard a time as possible. Of course, some pleasures need to be left behind, in clear recognition of their potential to keep us in bondage. These are the pleasant Vedanas that increase unwholesome states. But other pleasant Vedanas instead increase wholesome states. These could include the joy of maintaining moral conduct, of sharing one's possessions with others, of deepening concentration, and above all, the joy of insight and letting go.
Yeah, so this is just so helpful. I feel it speaks so directly to me. I'm sure many meditators feel that way. For me, just learning that it's okay to be happy, that it's okay to be happy while meditating, that it's okay to experience pleasant, it's okay to learn how to work with the pleasant, subtle sensations.
Yeah.
I think for a long time, I was scared of working with subtle, pleasant sensations because I thought, oh no, I'm going to start going down the path of craving and all this. Yeah. But it's a skill to learn to deal with them, to work with them, just like how we learn to work with pain.
Yeah.
So.
How would you explain to somebody who does not know about this, how to be able to discern the difference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the fact is they're very similar in that they're just this vibrating, oscillating, vibrating quality. But we kind of know, one way to test is when the subtle goes away and the pain comes rushing back in, is the mind still okay? And then But I also find there's another way to tell, which is that when there's subtle sensation, you could kind of feel that the mind is craving, like it's starting to, it gets unbalanced, and you can see that slight elation or a lot of elation, and then it's like, oh, I'm off track.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's exactly the way. We can see whether it has wholesome or unwholesome repercussions in the mind. We can see that craving, clinging job coming up, or we can see there's this freedom and openness. And it's a wholesome state of mind, and wholesome joy is a key for progress on the path. Should never be overlooked, should never be shunned. This is a little bit a problem we have in general in the Theravada tradition. Perhaps because of trying to set themselves off against other traditions, at least the perception of other traditions as being a certain way. There is a very strong emphasis on this dukkha aspect and hard working, getting through. But that light touch of joy, wholesome joy, can make a world of difference and can make progress. It accelerates our progress, definitely. And it also makes us much nicer people to be around,
Yes. Exactly. Yes. It translates into our daily life, and that lightheartedness comes through into our daily life. Yeah. So thank you so much. It's such a beautiful book. And one last question before I forget, before we go to questions. Why did you dedicate this book to S.N. Goenka?
I practiced a long time in the tradition. I also taught in the tradition, and it has been the foundation for my practice. It has Goenkaji's teaching have made a major impact on my life. And so this is just a feeling of gratitude and the wish to share this with all those who also see Vedanā as a key point in the development of insight.
Okay, great, thank you. All right,
thank you for being such a lovely conversation partner.
Thank you very much. All right, let's see if any questions are here. Okay. So please, here's a little bit longer question. Let me read it. Please share what the textual material says about the connection between the emotional tone and the physical Vedana. In the Pali Sutta, the Buddha recommends active strategies to suppress the hindrances like ill will, fear, etc. What does the textual material say about how one should deal with unskillful emotions that arise during meditation as it relates to Vedana?
I think that for working with the hindrances, we can approach this ideally from the perspective of contemplation of the hindrances as described in the Satipatthana Sutta. And so there's like two areas. One is when the hindrance is not too overwhelming, whether it's ill will or sensual desire or restlessness or whatever it is. I can just be with it and watch it. And that can be done very nicely at the level of sensations. Because there's this mental recognition. Let me take anger, because that's I'm a professional in that. I was a very angry person, so I really know how to work with that. So when I'm really boiling with anger, but it's not to the point where I'm like going to act it out in some way. If I can watch what it does just to myself, it's very transformative. Now, how to watch that anger? Because it's such a complex thing. A said such and such, and I should have, and this blah, blah, blah. I have to go down to a level of the mind where I can leave behind the complexity of mental activities and reactivity. Vedanā. Just feeling the Vedanā tone of my present experience of anger. Painful, you know. The realization that every time I get angry, I am inflicting pain, first of all, on myself. So sobering. So sobering. However, that exploration needs to stay within a framework. When my anger gets to the point where I'm now blasting out at others, or maybe even ready to hit them, then I have to work with antidotes. Then I cannot just observe. It's become too much for me, and I have to use something to stop it, so that it doesn't act out. The problem is that normally that pulling off the emergency brake is the first thing that comes to our mind. Because of course Anālayo doesn't want to acknowledge to himself that he's angry. Or when he gets that acknowledgement, he feels guilty about it.
Right.
And then he gets angry with himself for getting angry. See the trick, Mara? So there is a lot of need to allow that room for the experience of angry Anālayo at the level of sensations. What are my sensations right now? How does it feel when I'm angry? And at that point, I don't need to dialogue about the person who has done this and they should not, and they're not respecting me, and blah, 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 blah. I'm just being with what it does to myself, and I'm putting burning coals into my heart. It's burning, it's painful. Just knowing that makes a world of difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, water bubbles is a wonderful metaphor. According to Patrick Evan Wilson, Lady Sayadaw told us to keep analyzing Vedanā as a combination of the four elements in the kalapas. Could you tell us about that?
The theory of kalapas belongs to a historically different period of Buddhism compared to the position from which I'm talking now. Saying that is not in any way meant to be a value judgment. It's not that early is right and later is wrong or anything of that. But I believe that for us, particularly in the West, it is important to have that historical perspective. And so an atomic theory in terms of kalapas is not found in the early discourse. This is very clearly a development in later Theravada tradition and Pan-Indian tradition, the whole interest in atomic parts. So because of that, I don't really have the competence to say much about it, because for me, working with the elements is not so much as subtle aspects of the 8 or whatever parts the kalapa has. For me, approaching it from an early Buddhist perspective, working with the elements is just about general qualities: solidity, hardness, cohesion, temperature, and motion. And that is a different approach, not saying that this is right, this is wrong, but this is quite different from, I think, the approach that the questioner has in mind.
Third question, how can I proceed in realizing that sensations are non-self?
I would like to ask a counter question here, which is not possible. I would want to ask the question, what do you mean with not self? What does it mean for you? What do you mean with not self? Could put aside, say we are all here in our Buddhist bubble, we all would theoretically agree that there is no permanent soul of any type. Identification, ownership, no? My feeling. I am or I have feeling. There's a nice passage in the Mahanidana Sutta, which I'm actually also discussing in the book. So maybe I don't go into that. It gives a very nice analysis of not self notions in relation to Vedanā, particularly in relation to Vedanā. But just the thing that if I have joy, pleasant feelings, and I identify with that, we said that before, when the pain comes, that identification is still there, the pain affects me much more. And the ownership of Vedanā. That's the secret of success of mindfulness-based stress reduction, all these mindfulness-based interventions that we nowadays have, that it's not necessarily to own Vedanā. I can experience pain without making it my pain. And if it is not my pain, it also does not affect me as much as if it would, if it still stays my pain. So these are very practical aspects to explore the repercussions of introducing the perspective of not self into our practice to free ourselves from suffering.
Thank you. The fourth question, thank you for this rich program. My question, are there records that the early nuns participated in translating the Dhamma?
We have a whole textual collection, the Itivuttaka, which was reportedly given by, discourses given by the Buddha at Kosambi, and they were heard by an attendant, a woman attendant of the harem of the king, Kujuttira. And she memorized these and then passed them on to the women in the harem, and they passed them on to the bhikkhunis. And they then passed them on to Ananda. Supposedly, so goes the story. The Itivuttaka has distinct introductory and concluding formulas that differ from all of the other discourses. Like all the others have Evang Me Sutang, and the Itivuttaka, I think, is Buddhang Hetang Bhagavata Iti Me Sutang, something like that. And this is the same in a Sanskrit fragment and in a Chinese parallel. So this one particular collection is distinct from all the others, and the only way to explain it is that it really goes back to a transmission by women. And women have made a major contribution to the teaching of the Dharma. In fact, the next book I'm publishing with Wisdom, should come out end of next year, is called Daughters of the Buddha. And I have collected all the teachings given by bhikkhunis and laywomen. And when I started that book, I thought, oh, I hope it's going to be a full book, because I thought there was just a few. There's quite a lot, And there are some teachings which are unique, like the simile of the chariot to explain not self, which in the Chinese she's called Sela, in the Pali she's called Vajira. This is a unique contribution by a nun, very powerful simile that has percolated down all the Buddhist traditions. You find it in the Milinda Panya, you find it in Mahayana texts. So women have made a major contribution to the Dhamma, which unfortunately, due to what we usually call patriarchal tendencies in the Buddhist traditions, is not always fully recognized. And this is why one of my main topics of research is precisely the position of women in Buddhism, why I'm also happy to have a female discussion partner here. I think it's really important for us to recognize the important contribution women have made, and to make sure that in today's world we give women the place to say their way about Dharma, to give their teachings of the Dharma. It's so enriching. It's such a shame that tradition has not always been able to do that.
Wonderful. I look forward to that book. The fifth question. Is Vedana different from what S.N. Goenka refers to as Samma Vedana?
There's no Samma Vedana. That must be a mistake.
Yeah, I'm also not familiar with that term. So, okay. Number 6, how do you understand emotions in context of the practice? Are they thoughts and or sensation?
The early texts do not have a precise equivalent for emotions. But if I would have to place them somewhere, I would say Chitta is probably the best place. Chitta is one of 3 different terms we use for the mind. Sometimes they're synonyms, sometimes they're slightly different. The other 2 is manas and vijnana. And Chitta, the Chinese translated with the heart radical. You could translate it as the heart mind. And if we look at the Satipatthana Sutta, the 3rd Satipatthana is on Chitta. And there we get emotions, their presence or absence. Raga, lust is an emotion, anger, ill will, delusion. But then the Satipatthana Sutta opens the spectrum also towards mental states that are related to meditation practice, concentrated mind, surpassable mind, etc., liberated mind. So Chitta is, we cannot reduce Chitta to emotion, but we can place emotion under Chitta. From the perspective of working in the tradition that gives importance to sensations, the question is, as long as I have the ability to clearly recognize a particular mental state, the key for me to work with that is at the level of sensations. And it's the same thing I said earlier. An emotion can be very complex. If I come down to the feeling tone, it's very simple. Very easy to stay with that and observe that, like I was earlier saying about anger and the painful feeling. So working with sensation gives a very nice tool of observing emotions, a very simple point of contact, without getting lost in the complexity, and of course, without getting carried away by the emotion itself.
I see that question. The question actually I mispronounced. It wasn't Samma Vedana, it was Samvedana. And apparently Goenkaji uses Samvedana in Hindi to avoid confusion of Vedana, which only means pain in some Indian languages.
Yeah, I don't speak Hindi, so I can only speak from the viewpoint of Pali. In Pali, we don't have Samvedana.
Okay. Okay.
At least I'm not aware of it.
Okay. So now 7th question.
We have
regarding
the word Pati Samvedeti, but I don't think Samvedeti. Anyhow, yeah.
Okay. So 7th question. Regarding understanding when one is pushing oneself too hard, can you elaborate more on how to realize it and what to do about it?
If you're really working with Vedanā, you should feel the tenseness of the body. And that tenseness of the body tells us something about the tenseness of the mind. All it needs is relax and try to smile.
Yeah, nice, simple answer. Number 8, sometimes I feel indifferent, resistant, or even fearful to have joy and pleasant sensation. At other times, I feel I am forcing myself to cultivate and feel joy, as it is part of the awakening factor. It's a comment.
Yeah, this is again a question I would really like to see the questioner, to see her or his face and hear the tone of voice, because that usually tells me a lot. But if I take from my own experience, at least for many of us Westerners, particularly myself growing up as in a very traditional Catholic background, there has been quite some need to work with the feeling that I'm not entitled to joy. I sometimes somehow do not deserve joyful. And that then trying to bring in joy feels somehow, because I'm not really entitled to, I have to make an effort. And then it feels false and constructed, and it gets even tense in a different way. And this is something to just be very soft and exploring and seeing that this idea that we are not entitled to joy is definitely not Buddhism. It's not what the Buddha teaches. And so am I able to let go of that kind of conditioning? And to also not make joy, not circumscribe joy too tightly. Have a broad concept of joy that even catches very, very slight, subtle little bit of joy, such as just being in the present moment, walking out in nature. This is a very simple, natural thing. Walking out in nature, you don't go like, wow, it's wonderful. You just like, do, 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 do. But to catch these little soft kind of joys and find a way of being very gently, gently allowing them into our life and seeing where that lands. Whether that can land in a heart that is willing to accept that, to allow myself to experience that subtle little joy. It's not asking that much. And from that small little bit, then slowly it will grow and flourish. But footnote, this is something, if I am on the right track with you and I can't see you, so I don't know, then this is something you need to look at. Because as long as this pattern persists, it's very difficult to make genuine progress. Thank you.
Number 9, it's on the same track. Any tips on the cultivation of wholesome joy?
Well, for me, the two most powerful sources are, first of all, recollection of my morality. As a monk, I am sincerely dedicated to an ethical life, and I'm keeping up to that. I'm really living up to my own standards. And I think whether if you're a layperson, if you're not killing, stealing, etc., which I'm sure you don't, this is something to recollect. And the second one is I have a very close relationship to the Buddha. So just to think that I'm a Buddha, I'm a son of the Buddha, I'm walking in his footsteps. I get like, oh, all goose pimples. And so this is something, a recollection of the Buddha, a practice that is not very well known in the West, unfortunately. It's a standard practice in Asia. I grew up as a Buddhist in Asia. In fact, I would self-identify as a Sri Lankan Buddhist because all my Buddhism comes from living in Sri Lanka. It's just so natural. I even had that teaching Vipassana courses in the Goenka tradition in Sri Lanka. And I remember sometimes when people were really like having really problems and issues. And magical formula. Buddhu Saranai. Take refuge in the Buddha. Oh, everything gone. It's just amazing. Just this, all these things from the past come up, and your work and pains and all that. And then there's this orientation. I take refuge in the Buddha. This orientation towards the teacher, and for them, that the whole thing was over. For me, it's not that strong, but just this building up this personal relationship with the Buddha. And I'm not needing to be sure that this is exactly the historical person, but just the one who taught these wonderful teachings is enough for me. To have this heartfelt feeling, and to know like I'm trying to walk in his footsteps. For me, that is I can't fail. Then getting joy is impossible. So I would suggest to work on morality and recollect that, and to work on having a personal relationship with the Buddha in some way or another. That can be with the figure, that can be with the idea, can be, as it is for me, through the one who gives these teachings. But to have this personal relationship, well, because these two are absolutely, definitely wholesome types of joy. There's no need, as we were talking earlier with Marta, to double check, is this really wholesome? They are wholesome, no question. And this is something we can always bring in when there are difficulties. A third, which is more prominent in the Mahayana traditions, but we also have it in early Buddhism, Theravada, is to have this aspiration to benefit others. Means I am practicing not just for myself. I'm practicing to benefit others. And if I have this altruistic dimension, without thereby losing the perspective that I need to work on myself first of all, sinking in the mud, I cannot pull out others. I have to step out of the mud, then I can pull out others. But as I'm stepping out of the mud, let me take others along. Let me help others to the degree to which I'm able and they're willing to take it. to bring in this altruistic dimension as a formulation of our motivation every time when we sit down to meditate can make a lot of difference. It brings in a natural element of joy, and it also gives us a framework for facing difficulties. We all have difficulties, physical difficulties, others in the practice. If at that time I'm just practicing for myself, it can get very tough. But if I'm experiencing that difficulty, that pain for the sake of others, it's so much easier to handle it.
The 10th question, we still have 10 minutes left. I find it much easier to observe and let go of aversion through unpleasant Vedana. It's the pleasant Vedana that is not as obvious to my observation and let go and be equanimous. Any advice on this?
I think this is just a very astute observation, because painful feeling is more easy to let go of because we don't want to have it. This is natural. So it just takes a little bit more of time and more scrutiny with the pleasant feelings to let go of them. This is just, I mean, you're right, I agree.
Okay. 11th question. The tip of this is a little bit longer question. The tip of the sword simile is very helpful. Wondering about your comment earlier on being silent and ducking without showing vulnerability when an enemy warrior is shooting physical arrows. In contrast, please talk more about how to respond to mental pain that one ostensibly perceives as caused by other people. For example, when a loved one says or does things that one finds hurtful. In the heat of the moment, even if one does have the presence of mind to focus on Vedana and Anicca, what's less clear is how to respond appropriately in a way that's helpful to all concerned.
The first thing I think is always to try to have equanimity or come back to a point of equanimity, because if the loved one just said something that really hurt me, at that moment acting out on that feeling of hurt is not a good idea. So I would, if I can, I mean, as a monk, I'm trying to put myself into your shoes, you know.
Right.
I don't really have this particular situation because I'm living pretty much by myself, but just imagining. So I would try to, I would keep a very clear awareness of my embodiedness through Vedana. Am I still in the body? And am I able to maintain some degree of equilibrium, equanimity with what is just happening? And if that is not the case, I would try to diffuse by trying to move away until I've regained my vantage point of equanimity. Because when something is being said that really hurts me, what happens is that my whole world view will collapse around that feeling of the hurt ego. And I will no longer be able to see where the other person came from. It is at least possible that the other person was not intending to hurt. And it is also possible that even if he or she was intending to hurt, that this is actually coming from back all kind of other conditions, which I'm not able to see as long as I'm in that pain of being hurt. So that, if you like, in the simile of the being shot at by the arrow, first of all, this ducking down so that I don't get shot at others, but also actually being aware that there are others shooting. Because the other guy who gets the other arrows was not thinking about the enemy over there. He was just totally involved in his pain and then acting so stupidly that he gets shot at by other arrows. So immediately broadening the perspective and being aware of the other person. Where is this other person coming from? Some trauma from parents? I don't know. Something I have done a long time ago that has been in the background is now coming out. I mean, there's all different kinds of perspective that can help me to take it less personally. And that is the key. Not taking it personal. If I don't take it personal, I slip over and it becomes an opportunity for learning. Every problem, without exception, for us practitioners, is a learning opportunity. Sometimes we miss out on that. Okay, but sometimes we catch it. These are the juicy ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this will be the last question because it's almost time to wrap up. So when and how did you decide to become a monk? How do you make your monk life compatible with your academic life? Could you please talk about it in terms of how to balance your vows as a monk and your everyday activities, both as a monk and as an academic? What are the main challenges you have experienced living both lives?
I didn't really decide to become a monk. I think I got in contact with meditation while I was still living in Germany, and I saw that it was changing me. And within 3 months, I closed on everything, left, and went to Asia. And in Asia, I stayed for some time in India. And because of the visa, I had to go to Thailand. And so I set a retreat at Swanmok, and then they were just starting this rainy season. And in Thailand, there's a tradition for people to get ordained for 3 months for the rainy season. I could just join that. And once I was enrolled, I just loved it. So it was not really like something I had planned ahead. I was just giving priority to the meditation practice. And this led me into the monastic life. And this is also what makes me combine the academic life and the monastic life. There are challenges, particularly as a Western monastic. There are quite a number of my academic colleagues who don't fully take me serious because I'm a believer and I should be the one who is getting studied, but not the one who does the studies. There's some tensions there. But yeah, that's just the way the situation is. But I think the key, and this is also maybe bringing it a little bit away from myself to all of us, I think the key for all of us is to make meditation, the dedication to meditation practice, really the heart of our lives. If we can get that foremost priority over everything else, whether it's building up an organization, having a relationship, having a family, whatever you choose, but having that overarching reference point there, meditation practice, based on understanding of the Dharma, of course, but that practice, that dedication to practice every day, some sitting, every year, some period of retreat, then everything else naturally falls into place behind that. And that meditation practice for us, Vipassana practitioners, of course, the orientation towards Nibbana. Itang santang itang panitam, that is peaceful, that is sublime. Samma sankhara samato, stilling of all constructions. Sabbupadipati nisamo, giving up of full support. Tanhakayo viram, destruction of craving, dispassion. Nirodho, nibbana, cessation, nibbana. That orientation point, everything else will fall into place. I think that's a very good place to wrap up. Thank you very much to Briha and Marta, and to all of you for listening and being here with me. It's been a lot of joy to exchange on the Dhamma with my Dhamma sister and Dhamma brother.
Well, thank you so much, Bhante. And in closing, on behalf of Pariyatti, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this event. And of course, a very special thank you to Venerable Bhikkhu Anālayo and Marta van Patten for joining us today. And also I'd like to acknowledge that as a small resource-limited nonprofit organization, we rely on volunteers to help us wherever possible. And today's event would not have been possible without the generous support of Tina Savla and Chandra Gupta, who've been in the background managing the technology. So thanks again for your help. It is very much appreciated. So thanks again, everybody. Okay.
Thank you so much, Bhante.
Okay, thank you, Bhante.